Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of What the Ref, where we discuss everything about everybody's favourite research excellence framework. I'm Gemma.
I'm James.
I'm Ola.
And today we're talking of many different things. Stefan Collini back in the press, ARMA Conference, more things from our NTO workshops. So let's get started, shall we? So let's get started with the fun one, the one that we're both fresh from. James and I were in ARMA this week. James, how was your ARMA experience?
It was good, and I just want to say before that, what the rest would happen this week. I had a lovely instant where someone I know walked up to me as an academic and said, "Hi, thanks for the podcast." I was like, "What?" And it turned out they'd used the podcast to help them with their job interview because they found it a really useful way of understanding the kind of culture of the ref. So, yeah. So I told that story at ARMA to a few people who kind of liked it as well. ARMA was good, right? I mean, it felt incredibly welcomed. That's the thing that kind of struck me. People were saying hi all the time, people I didn't know, or maybe I, connected with on LinkedIn and stuff like that. My general vibe is that research managers are politely miffed that loads of important stuff about the ref hasn't been finalized when it comes to things like, specifically the ref. But it's a good vibe, good conference, massive rooms. And lots of tea and coffee in most places. That was cool. So, yeah.
So how did it feel? Because you guys delivered a workshop, a kind of an NTO lab.
Mini
how
workshop.
Did it feel to have so many people there?
Well, there were over 700 people at ARMA this year, which was extraordinary. We didn't fill the room with all 700. We were in, competition with the main auditorium, but we had a great group. We had some people there that were new. We had some people there that we'd seen before. Some people have experienced the workshop, so they were giving us, very good endorsements from people within the community, and that was great. We delivered a small snippet. So we only had 40 minutes, right, James? So most of our workshops go from half a day to a day. So we gave them a small snippet. We talked about what we were doing. We had talked, more importantly, about what we had done and what we could provide them with in terms of evidence that we've already done, which is a little bit different perhaps to what the community had been hearing from the ref, which is we're going to do something. We promise it's going to come in autumn. But, it was really nice to be able to offer them something because they obviously wanted it, needed it. And then we gave them a very small snippet of what we do at the workshops and the kind of discussions that they should be having, with the idea that even if they don't do a workshop with us, they can replicate the same sort of process in their own institutions. Yeah, it was good. It was, everybody said it was fun, which is great. After doing a couple of workshops, it's great to hear that it's still fun. What about you, James?
I think one that struck me about doing the mini version of the workshop is that we didn't get time to really dig into the kind of solutions part. I think that's what the value of those longer workshops are, is that you can spend time with people, providing a structured environment to evaluate real outputs, the last ref, that are of diverse kind of output type. And we're going to come to diversity of outputs in a bit. And then, but also spend some time really talking through what are the solutions here, not just presenting problems. So I guess we left it open at the end to people saying, if you want us to come and do an NTO workshop in your house, we can come. And then we obviously gasped because we've got quite a lot on the agenda already. But I'm sure we'll get a few more invites to pop up and see people and spend more time on solutions. Well, potential solutions that we're proposing at least, as opposed to merely pointing out problems. Because I think the problems, at least in that community, based on the Q&A session with the ref, various members of the ref team that was earlier in the conference, I think the problems are kind of well established and well understood among research managers.
And the need for information. There's a lot of need for information. It's my mood was the research managers and administrators are not immune to the kinds of tensions that academics are feeling in universities at the moment, and it was not surprising, and I don't want to use the word heartening, but we're all in this together. So it's good to know that feeling is shared and that they are aware of that, especially when it comes to putting submissions in for the ref and also motivating researchers to do the research necessary to put a submission in for the ref. So it was good to hear that kind of information as well. But, in that darkness at the time, there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, with the future of universities, but also with the future of ref. And I think a lot of people went to that conference hoping that it would provide some clarity. And yet I think the overall, mood, as you put it, was politely miffed. And it was like, well, here we go again, more uncertainty and more, waiting. And it is interesting to see how it goes. On the ref panel, they were talking about in the coming weeks, then it was the coming months, and then it was autumn. And someone in the comments said, exactly when in autumn? Can you please give us a date? And it depends on when you describe the end of autumn. I'm Australian, so it's the end of November, but technically it's the 20th of December. So there's a big difference between that, and it's also a long time to wait. So we're waiting.
I haven't been with you guys, but I just managed to watch a bit of the YouTube live stream on the Q&A from the RDAP and PDAP, and there is some glimmer of news and information that is quite exciting. What do you think?
Well, the thing on the day was that Alice put up this slide that had the diversity of outputs as a potential replacement to Annex K, and it's not the actual replacement to the CKU Annex K, but it's a version of it. And then by the time I managed to look at a couple of things and gasp and type them down, then the slide had gone. So that was good this morning to get into the office and see that the video recording was up and take a screen grab. Now we've got things like drama, VR-enabled content, new materials, geological maps, food products. Someone's going to put a piece of bread on the table.
No reagents. They're not there.
No reagents. I know.
I'm so disappointed. But this is a long list.
How did we know about the reagents in the first place? How did that?
Because it was in one of the statements that came out of Research England at some point about the ref, and it was given as an example of the kind of diversity of outputs you could produce. I guess we don't know if this one's going to be
fascination with it, basically, and attach myself because I was imagining. But food products might be my new reagents. Who knows?
There you go. And as a vegan, maybe there'll be some interesting vegan food products, that are being...
we need that.
Well, can you taste test, or maybe they get a section? Yeah. I don't know. The other one is models. And I think we might need a little bit of clarification before my imagination goes away with me on what that's going to mean. Someone turns out with a, genetically modified Naomi Campbell and puts her in the middle of the room and says, evaluate her. Point being, we need some clarification on this very quickly before rumours start going.
There are still some outputs that are missing because Ben and I went to Exeter to take part in the arts and culture event on activating creativity in UK universities. And we ran a little short lab on NTOs. And someone came up with the idea of networks and communities as an output of research. And there was a bit of a debate about that, but actually they were quite clear in articulating the research process that had gone into that to create networks and communities. So that could be something potentially added, a little bit, left field.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about that.
I don't know if you've noticed the other category has disappeared, and I don't know whether that was intentional or that just on the slide is missing in the presentation.
But it's the long list, Ola. So basically, anything that comes into the short list that's on the long list but doesn't turn into the short list, I guess, will become the other category. So, to put an other category,
that would be a big thing to disappear.
Well, that's what I would think. I mean, this is what happens. I don't know about communities. I don't know if that is in line with refable or perhaps even accessible by the CKU kind of criterion of originality, significance, and rigor. But it's an interesting discussion point. I think that when we go through with that list, I think that lines need to be drawn for the sake of clarity, and that's what the ref is about. It's not about what is or isn't valuable necessarily, but they have to draw lines about what's in and out. And so maybe communities and practices might need to sit this one out, but doesn't necessarily mean it won't be in the future. James, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think that obviously this isn't a final list. It's not in any logical order. It clearly is a collection of things put on a slide, which I think is really useful and helpful to think that clearly RDAP has been considering these things. I'm assuming there'll be a lot of consolidation. There's a lot of things here which are sort of subcategories of something else, and may end up being described as, this category could include these things. I guess the thing ultimately is that the categories kind of don't, I mean, they matter from a perspective of like ensuring the ref is saying there are lots of different types of things that one could submit as an example of, a kind of a contribution, knowledge, understanding, right? But it doesn't really matter, the list in and of itself, because there's no sort of like, it's helpful to be able to track it and look at it, but it doesn't super matter in terms of the ref itself, because there's not like, potentially there could be in the future, and we've got a policy paper out that suggests it might, but like we've not in a situation where like types of output are being assessed by certain types of expert groups who are brought in to say, hi, I'm an expert in films, I will be here to help guide you with this particular piece of assessment. That's not happening at the moment. So the list doesn't matter unless there's part of a longer trajectory towards type or output type experts being embedded within the evaluation process. But the main thing for me, I would say very quickly, is that I'm really keen that I want to see diversity of outputs in this, the replacement of Annex K, but I hope it doesn't change everything too much and make all our kind of maths when we look at longitudinal stuff across multiple refs complicated, because we'd like to be able to still look at the like change over time.
Yeah. I think the other thing is we need to reflect the change between the title of the criterion from, previous refs to Ref 2029. In previous ref, it was outputs. Okay, so communities, trees, things, but now it's contributions to knowledge and understanding. So that, in a way, subtly changes the orientation about what counts and what is valuable and what isn't. And so when you're talking about what that Annex K will look like, is this a contribution to knowledge and understanding? Not necessarily, is this an output of research, but does this make a contribution? And I think that new title will be a very important, tool in which to decide what is included in that shortlist and what is excluded.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to put it, actually.
So but ARMA, joyful experience. I hear there was some stealing of the microphone and singing at the end of the night, but James and I had retired to the football at that point in time. It was a very difficult decision to make between football and ARMA, but we are looking forward to the next one. What about you, James? What do you say about the difficulty in choosing football versus ARMA?
Well, we took some of ARMA to the pub, so that was fine. And actually, the conversation carried on whilst discussing football. So, I was going to say actually that I think, the comments section during the Q&A of the ref panel was really interesting. And I won't go through, we've written down loads of examples of comments that came from that, but they're really interesting if you kind of pick through them. People asking more about what kind of the role of RDAP and PDAP in kind of changing approaches to outputs. People asking questions about, saying, well, we welcome the fact there's more diverse outputs, but there's no mandates. There's no definition of how they're going to assess. Can you help us? People asking about clarifying how it will be enforced in practice that diversity is included within the CQU submissions. And one particular question I just wanted to pick out that went really word for word is like someone saying that like a point that Stephen Hill touched on in the interview we did in a previous podcast, which is previous refs have also said you can submit diverse forms of output, that you can submit these not pre-submitted things. But the questioner, ARMA, was saying, well, what's really interesting is that that's been there before, but there's now being matched by a sense that there is a different rhetoric, a clear rhetoric that the ref is saying, not saying we want these things, quote unquote, but actually the rhetoric suggests that it's an important part of the agenda now. But they're still saying, well, in practice, what does that mean? And what do you actually expect to happen? And Stephen's point in the previous podcast was, well, you can change policy, but you can't force people to do it unless you put mandates on. So there's an interesting kind of thing going on here that I don't think anyone wants any kind of, we have a 5% manifesto, but I don't think anyone wants any mandates, but it'd be interesting to know, maybe behind closed doors, maybe we'll find out years after Ref 2029 finishes, like what the ref team really would feel like success looked like. Now they've gone to the effort of not only having a list of things, but rhetorically creating structures which mean that they're saying to universities and signaling to universities, these are important things for us. That'd be really nice to know what they feel, quote, success looks like. But loads and loads of great questions from the panelists there.
Can I just take something about that success and what it looks like? I think sometimes I feel like, the ref has, as Stephen said, and as we know, has enabled these conclusion of things for many different cycles. But universities haven't taken it up. And in a way, it always feels like the ref rules and the ref, rhetoric is trying to compensate for the bad behavior of universities in previous years. So it does feel like, the ref has definitely changed. Look, this is what we need to do. But again, as we know, whether universities, especially when they're in a more precarious situation than they were in Ref 2021, whether universities will take the bait and say, well, actually, this is an opportunity, let to be seen. Sorry, I'm a bit skeptical after watching this for many, many years. But there's a little glimmer of hope that maybe they'll take the bait and we can see what it looks like in a couple of years' time. It's not that long, actually.
No,
it's not that long. So... No. What are we going to do with this podcast after Ref is finished? What,
there'll
the
be
ref
another
now?
ref. Well, probably. Well, if Stefan Collini had his way, of course, there wouldn't be another ref, which kind of segues us to the next thing we're going to talk about, because, I put this in here because I think many colleagues in the sector do read the London Review of Books. It is one of those sort of academic publications many people look at. Stefan Collini writes a lot about universities in there, and many people are aware of his kind of, his view, his perspective. He does mention ref very specifically in the article that came out, and I'll just read it out. It said, the ref is a depressing example of a mechanism that initiated a way of distributing research funding most productively, but which has morphed into a hugely expensive, attention-engrossing status marker. Few things would improve the intellectual culture of universities more quickly than the complete abolition of this flawed and coercive exercise. And I think this contrasts starkly, I think, with two things I've experienced recently. One is Stephen Hill on our recent podcast saying, well, yeah, you could get rid of it, guys, but if you do, there's no accountability, and ultimately there's no way you'll keep the same level of funding without accountability. So maybe Steph Collini thinks we shouldn't have that funding. I don't know. And the second one was being in ARMA and being around research managers who in many cases are quite skeptical of ref, and going to a workshop specifically on imagined futures of the next ref, which was a lot of fun, where the first point was, well, imagine the next ref. You're not allowed to imagine it doesn't exist. To imagine what fundamental changes you would make. And we had a really wonderful structured workshop thinking about that, and got to points where we could all go, they're all very different in the room, but could all go, yeah, that could be like a workable thing, and start to get into the conversation of trade-offs. And once you get the conversation about trade-offs, you realize that there's loads that works about the current system because they've clearly calibrated it carefully against trade-offs. There's no perfect system, but this one seems to have fewer worse things in some cases, right? So I think it's an interesting prompt, because a lot of people will read that Stefan Collini piece and it will be circulated widely, and people will express those opinions, and we respect those opinions, right? At the same time, we probably feel that it's not going to get gotten rid of unless you just get rid of research funding, which I don't think anyone wants.
Yeah, I think Stefan Collini is a very interesting one. I read it and went, yeah, okay, this is a very traditional output for somebody who, it gives an idea. I just like to say clickbait doesn't supplement citations, Steve. So we can talk about that. I think that when I read Stephen Collini's book, I was like, okay, there's no new information here. I've had the privilege of reading Stephen Collini's stuff for many, many years, and it's the same thing, and it's the same lens, etc. The fact that he hasn't seized the ref as something that can be altered rather than eliminated is perhaps very telling of the situation. But the other thing is that someone said, should I read it? And I said, yeah, you just need to take a really stiff drink before you read it, and then maybe come back to it. Because it is reading it through the lens of a very, very privileged individual within the academic landscape. He is in a particular university. He has a particular status, and he's been around for many, many years. That doesn't necessarily mean that translates to being able to envisage a future with or without the ref through an objective, pragmatic approach, perhaps. That's about as diplomatic as I can get, James. But, yes, I read the article, and yes, I'd had a couple of drinks.
So what would be his argument for knowing what's happening out there in the research landscape if we didn't
he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that. He just thinks it's highly bureaucratic, extremely expensive, soul-crushing, all the rest of it, and yet he wants to get it rid. But look at us. We talk about the ref, and it's entirely joyful. So, there is a different way. He's not known for thinking about ref as a tool or something other than depressing.
Because it's not just about accountability and distributing the taxpayers' money, but it's actually about knowing and trying to, characterize the UK research ecosystem.
I think it's also about trying to make a research sector that we want to get for the future, rather than necessarily a setting in the past. I think that he sees it as an audit of things that have already happened and therefore is unnecessary, rather than as a tool we can use to build a better future. What do you reckon, James?
I mean, I sympathize with if you read the piece outside of the quote, the story he tells effectively is like, well, look at my particular discipline, or a discipline he's very familiar with in history. Look at which departments ranked highest in the last couple of refs, and look where they are now, basically, disassembled. So his argument is logical in the sense that, well, if ref is about creating a it's about distributing funding to high quality areas which they themselves then can sustain for the future, and they're not areas or institutions that are highly privileged. So he is clearly connecting in with less privileged areas of the academy. Part of his argument is like, well, should this thing exist if that's one of the outcomes? And of course, that's an outcome that sits in a very particular disciplinary space, but I can sympathize with that. The issue becomes, I think, and this is where the wider piece is worth reading, I think, because what it's doing is entangling those conversations with the wider kind of university finances, which is that at some point in the earlier lives of these research exercises, they were much more fundamental to the economic health of departments, schools, whatever you're going to call them, faculties. And we're now in a situation where the ref is important in a mix of funding, but is not the key driver of economic sustainability within UK universities, which we know is a problematic system. So I think part of what the motivation might be actually, well, if the money went away and it was moved into competitive research funding, maybe some people actually would prefer that because it would mean we lose the bureaucracy of the ref. I don't think there's a good future where we only have research funding in that sense. Maybe, but as Stephen said in his interview with us a few weeks ago, like there's no simple, equitable system to distribute these funds, which wouldn't result in some kind of game playing and some kind of distortions. And what we have has become a bit a Christmas tree-y. And I think that's the session I was at ARMA was very focused on how you can remove some of the bits of the Christmas tree. Like, the classic thing of just like, rather than add a new thing, take a new thing off before you add a new thing, right? And I think a lot of the thinking there was about, is there too much additional stuff we now do through the ref when we could have actually streamlined it a little bit? But I get where his logic flows from, because there are certain disciplinary areas that clearly feel, well, what's the point in winning if 8 years later you don't exist?
Yeah, I think he had some really good points. Like there was one, but he was doing it in a lens that I was already angry by the time I got to that part. I mean, he wasn't saying anything wrong, and it was very anecdotal through a very, very particular lens. But there was a point where he said, the QR funding is now a drop in the ocean of funding for universities, and much of the QR funding that is, earned by a unit of assessments like performance in the ref, so he was taking history as an example, rarely translates to the university as a whole valuing that unit of assessment. And he was talking about, a particular university's history department that has been, very much decimated by compulsory and voluntary redundancies, despite the fact that they were top in the UK for when it came to ref outputs. And yeah, that's a really bad consequence. But I think that the rule there is perhaps a funding model that doesn't include, that really values QR funding. That's not necessarily increasing the QR funding amount per se, but a more sustainable funding model for universities as civic knowledge organizations is perhaps needed, not just teaching outputs. And at the moment, that balance between the income from teaching and the income from international students respectively, and the money that you would get from QR funding, it's not balanced enough. At the moment it's valued because any funding is good funding, but it's not valued enough to change decision. And rarely does a unit of assessment do well. Does that QR funding go straight to that unit of assessment, right? So, and that was a really good point, but that was in the middle of a larger argument that I thought was, we're all going to die and everything's terrible. And yeah, I get that feeling, but I don't think that's the most pragmatic way out of this. And I don't know if adding more noise to an already, crescendo about how everything is going to go wrong is particularly helpful in this particular time. And when you look at ARMA and they're talking about how can we change it? How can we change it? It would be really great if we changed ref through its strengths rather than just taking the bits of the Christmas tree off that are not working or seemingly not working. I mean, there were some suggestions in that session that I just went, no, you can't do that. There was a suggestion like just bring auditors and get them to do it. And you're like, well, who are these people? What kind of training do they have? So yeah, I understand where he's coming from, but perhaps we take a different perspective on the future, and perhaps we have a different stake in the future of the academy too. James, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I love the idea of auditors suddenly roaming the corridors of my department in July when nobody's here.
Yeah, I'd love PricewaterhouseCoopers to come in and tell me exactly what I should and shouldn't be doing. Great. Yeah, that's a great idea.
But that's why communities that talk about it together are so valuable, because they actually, like, someone will say that and then immediately someone else will go, that would cost more money for these reasons. Or someone like in our group, someone was like, these things should be more rolling and ongoing. I was like, yeah, sounds great. But as long as you don't end up with like cliff edges every 12 months, because some of the system at universities at the moment is designed around cliff edges every 12 months. Yeah. Some of it is designed around cliff edges every 3 years. And some of it is designed around cliff edges however often the ref runs, right? And if you make everything compressed timescales, it increases the kind of financial chaos within universities. So there are loads of really good reasons coming out. It was nice to see that some of the ref team were actually, who were at the conference, were also at that session that was about, it was the ref SIG within ARMA who ran that session. It was nice to see some of them were actually there, because it meant they were listening and thinking and actually taking in some of the kind of the more radical ideas that we had in the room. Anyway,
just a clarification, SIG is special interest group, not some sort of widget. Might sound that way, but yeah. All right.
Ola, we wanted to come on to you talking, well, you recently had some insights from, was it activating creativity in UK universities?
Yeah, I've got to really, do a shout out to the organisers from University of Exeter, because they put on something really phenomenal, I think. And we, together with Ben, we delivered a lab on the NTO workshop. But more broadly, I think it was such a joyful event of creativity and actually bringing together people to think about how to embed creativity into research and how not to objectify creativity. And I think what was really nice throughout the events that they put on in the workshops was that they were quite happy with not having an objective or like a tangible output at the end of the workshop or lab. They're just happy to mess around in the process of thinking, of exploring, of talking. And we had some really lovely inputs from creative facilitators who brought in quite unusual methods of engagement and co-creation. So what's really fascinating is as we go through, the different universities nationally and experience the different disciplines and the different faculties and the different university cultures and research cultures, it's really nice to see how we are perceived differently and very positively in the creative and art disciplines. And I think that they're generally more embracing of diverse outputs because of the panel D reigning supreme within that space. So it's really nice to experience something different this time.
What was your favorite type of kind of co-creation facilitation activity? Was there Lego? What was it like?
Well, there was
give us an insight the type of facilitation.
There was
Playmobil.
Playmobil Pro. We had also Hannah Mumby, who's a creative facilitator, who came up with this amazing set of cards which look like tarot cards, which I said to her, look, this is like an amazing diverse output, because she developed the cards through a specific research process. It was about co-production. So we used the cards, and all the participants got a deck of those cards to play around within their organization. So that was really cool. We also had the long table discussion of people being able to join it at any point or drop out. And there was no topic as such. I mean, the topic was very broad. It was about creativity in research and UK universities. And people were so happy to take that conversation into different places and spaces, and just happy to mess around with thinking together.
That sounds really nice. I like the idea of research tarot cards. Show me your research future in tarot cards. It might be might be more reliable than some of the LLM models that propane to look at research stars in the future anyway. Oh, that sounds amazing, Ola. That sounds like a great experience. And I'm so glad to hear that, main panel B and creatives are taking a lead in this aspect.
Yeah, but like we've said before, there is that there is that sense of, let's just scrap the ref, shall we? Then we get into that conversation about, well, there's no alternative. So you do hear it all the time at the ground level. So it's really nice to have had the Stephen Hill on the podcast to give some really good, rationale about keeping this in still.
I think this is one of those moments, though, as well. Like, yes, we're called What the Ref. Yes, we're called Hidden Ref. Yes, we talk about ref a lot, but actually we don't really care about the ref, or at least I don't. Like, we really care about research culture more broadly. We care about, whether or not certain forms of research are valued when it comes to someone's promotion, whether it comes to someone's job application, when it comes to someone being seen as an expert or not by an external body. We care about that as much as we care about the ref in and of itself. And the ref is that lever that does change things in UK higher education, and we know that. And I think those communities, like, clearly they care about like the types of research they do being valued, even at the same time as though they think maybe the ref shouldn't exist. In a way, I'm kind of comfortable with that, so long as they're like they see the value in us pushing for those kind of changes. That's kind of cool to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ref is part of the UK research culture. I don't think it works against it. It's just there. Despite many different communities and many different, voices, Stephen Collini included, it's not going anywhere and hasn't gone anywhere. I think the question then is, how do we use it within our research culture rather than use that energy to work against it? There's so much good that can come from the ref, and there's so much good that can come from using the ref as a tool. I'd rather focus on that rather than putting all of my energy in trying to move a boulder with my little finger. It's not going to happen. So I would rather change the shape of the boulder than move it and make it something pretty and joyful. Because, James, you don't care about ref. We don't care about ref because we're in a very privileged position where we don't have to care about the ref professionally. But for me, intellectually, it's fascinating. So yeah.
Oh no, professionally, I have to care about it. I have to do things in response to it. It's more that like I'm not there. I'm not staking my career on improving and iterating the ref to make that the perfect thing.
Whereas I am.
Well, maybe you are. Should we move? Oh dear, we put Gemma out of a job.
It's fine. I'm just going to breathe. Okay,
should we move on to our jingle?
Jingle.
We have a folklore corner.
Oh yes, of course we do.
Cue up the jingle, Ben.
Folklore. Which one are we going to be doing today, James? Which piece of folklore are we going to discuss and perhaps even dispel?
Ola, was this one that came from you?
It did. That was actually from yesterday, from the NTO lab in Exeter, that if you're submitting diverse output or non-traditional output, you need to accompany it with a journal article, preferably, please. You must, in some circumstances even.
Well, let's quickly...
And I'll hand to Gemma for the answer.
Myth or reality?
Myth. It is common. It's a myth. It doesn't need an accompanying journal article. In fact, the journal article might be a way of talking about the significance of the non-traditional output, but it's not compulsory in any way, shape or form. I would say that a non-traditionally submitted output should be valued for the fact that it's a non-traditionally on its own terms rather than, evaluated through a traditional output. So no, you don't have to. You can submit, part of a portfolio, or you can submit evidence in the, the summary that you're allowed to do, or you can provide links, but that doesn't have to be an article itself. What about you, James?
That was easy.
Any examples? Yeah.
No, I was going to say that was easy.
Very easy.
That was
300. You have 300 words to explain the research process, which is not a lot.
Or maybe more in the future.
Maybe more in the future.
Our policy paper. So.
Or you can put it in the other category and have more space, even more space. But we've all had examples where we've talked to researchers who are like, yes, I've done a non-traditionally submitted output, and here's a paper that describes it. And you're like, well, you didn't have to write that paper. And their faces just, they look like they've just, you've just killed their dog or something. But, it doesn't. It can be assessed on its own merits. And so should it be.
I think this is where we get into the overlap between like what ref requires and what other things required. So I also spent some of ARMA a session that was on research valuation metrics, particularly thinking about things like QS. And of course, like, you know, if you want as a grouping your QS scores to do well, a big part of QS, though not the biggest, is citation metrics. And so I could imagine the situation in which a faculty or department or school, or wherever it might be, might not say you have to for the ref, but they might sort of make it seem like it's just the right thing to do to write a paper, because they know full well if that paper ends up indexed and loads of people cite it, it really helps with things like QS, right? So there's a kind of world in which with those different things interact. We know that those rankings are increasingly important for the financial health of universities as well. So I can see why someone might be sort of gently nudged into thinking, or not being disabused of the notion that they have to write a paper about their product or their website or their software or their exhibition or whatever it might be. Okay, thanks Ola. Thanks Gemma for a great discussion of everything that happened in ARMA and some other events that we've been at recently. We'll be back with another podcast soon, probably in the next couple of weeks. So check your usual feeds and YouTube for that. And of course, you can always follow us on things like LinkedIn if you want to know when the latest episodes are out. As ever, we're really keen to hear from people in our mailbag, particularly folklore or things you want us to discuss. WTRef@hidden-ref.org, or ping us on somewhere like LinkedIn and we'll find you. But yeah, hope you join us next time. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.